Here is another anecdote, and it's entitled Robert Maxwell, the Silent Frenchman, and the Helicopter. And it goes this way. Betty, Bob's wife, Jean, his PA, personal assistant that is, a man who seemed incapable of speaking, and I were sitting on the lawn at Headington Hill Hall one hot summer's day. We were about to have lunch served by Genius. As I've said before, Genius was Bob's butler. His boss called him Genius because he was so phenomenally thick. Bob arrived unexpectedly by helicopter, just as lunch was being served. His timing was immaculate. The irritatingly silent stranger, who was wearing a suit, collar and tie, sat down, although everyone else was standing up. The stranger appeared to be an enfant très mal élevé, which means a very badly brought-up child, and although his host had arrived, he continued to sit, staring into space. I wondered whether or not he had been taking drugs. Bob had no idea who this man was, and was irritated by his seemingly unauthorized presence and his behavior. "Who the hell are you?" he shouted. He was not in a particularly good mood that day. Incidentally, I haven't told you that this incident occurred very much towards the end of his life. Okay? The stranger remained glued to his chair and continued to say nothing, so I intervened. "You really must introduce yourself to Mr. Maxwell," I said. "You are on his soil." The man still said nothing. "Who are you, and what the hell are you doing on these premises?" asked Bob. I giggled nervously. The man rocked from side to side like a pendulum. "I'm on the Mirror," he eventually managed to mutter. There was a French lilt in his voice. "I still don't understand what you are doing in my garden," said Bob, mildly. "You asked me to come here," said the man. "Why the fucking hell didn't you say that in the first place? I certainly don't remember having invited you here," said Bob again. "I'm on the Mirror," repeated the stranger. Bob realized the man was French because of his accent and addressed him in his mother tongue, tutoying him throughout the brief conversation. "What have you learnt since working on the Mirror?" he asked peremptorily. Bob spoke French with a strange East European accent. The man was incapable of answering Bob's question. He, too, changed the subject and spoke English. By this time, we were all sitting down. Genius was passing dishes round the table. "I understand there is a silver cup here. On it there is an engraving by a representative of the Ethiopian government," he began. "Is that the only reason you're here?" asked Bob suspiciously. "Well, no, sir, but I would like to see it all the same. The engraving was put on the cup to thank you for your kindness to the Ethiopian people," ventured the strange Frenchman. Bob hated being sucked up to. He only respected people who stood up to him, like myself. Bob rose to his feet and wolf whistled. Genius scuttled out of the house and came to the table. "You whistled for me, Mr. Maxwell." "Yes," said Bob. "Go and fetch the silver cup donated to me by the Ethiopian government. You'll find it on the desk in the room next to the drawing room." Genius returned to the house but did not emerge for about 15 minutes. It was obvious that he had failed to find the cup. Bob got up and lumbered after him, swearing under his breath. The two men bumped into each other just outside the house. I started to giggle once more. "I couldn't find the cup, Mr. Maxwell," said Genius. Bob found it, but it was not where he had said it was. It was in a secretary's office. "All right, genius, it wasn't your fault, so you can dry your tears," said Bob. He handed the heavy cup to Jean, who looked at it briefly and handed it to the Frenchman. We began to eat. As was often the case, the food consisted of fresh salmon, peas, and boiled potatoes, accompanied by chilled white wine. I yearned for a gin and tonic. There was a long silence, which I broke. "Bob, I want to ask you a question," I said. "Well, what's your question?" "The book Never Alone with Rex Malone is sold out and might possibly be reprinted. If it is, may I quote you as having said, 'I was absolutely flabbergasted when I read it'?" "Yes," said Bob. "Can I also quote you as having said, 'I didn't know what had hit me'?" "No," said Bob. There was another very long silence. "I understand Guylaine is working for you at the moment," I said. "You understand right," replied Bob. He was definitely having an off day. He shoveled food into his mouth as if he were in a hurry. He got up and whistled for Genius once more. Genius rushed towards his boss. "Get the pilot out, will you?" "I'm leaving," said Bob abruptly. I said, "Bob, have you ever read a ghost story by M.R. James entitled 'Oh, Whistle to Me and I'll Come to You, my lad'?" "No," said Bob. The pilot came out of the house and walked towards Bob. Before getting into the helicopter, he, Bob that is, said goodbye to me, but no one else. He said nothing to Betty, his wife, or Jean, his PA, which I thought was rather singular. I started to laugh nervously. "What the hell are you laughing at?" asked Bob. "Oh, nothing," I said. "Goodbye, missy, and good luck with all your writings," he said. It suddenly occurred to me that he had flown from London because he had been told I was staying in the house. He had come to see me, and me alone. I was flattered. Within a few seconds, the helicopter was in the sky. Good God, thought I, the man's even more eccentric than I am. I have another Maxwell story, and this is called The Maxwell's Butler, who, as you know by now, he called Genius because he was proverbially thick. And the story goes this way. Bob referred to his butler as Genius because he was so proverbially stupid. Once when Bob asked him to fill the flute-like stemmed Venetian glasses with rosé wine, Genius poured red wine and white wine together into the glasses, making the wine look as if it were rosé. "No, no, 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 Genius," shouted Bob. "What do you want me to do, Mr. Maxwell?" asked Genius. "Find a bottle of rosé, which someone delivered to the house in a crate, and start again," commanded his boss. Genius left the dining room and failed to return for at least an hour. Bob rushed outside to look for him. I heard a lot of shouting, but was unable to decipher the words. Poor old Genius, he really wasn't suited to working at Headington Hill Hall. This incident also, like the last incident, occurred towards the end of Bob's life. And the story is entitled Maxwell's Butler and the Recently Sharpened Meat Cleaver. Genius had not been employed in the Maxwell's house for long. No one really knows why he did what he did in the following incident, although some witnesses thought that Genius had been intending to take his life because he had suddenly realized that he was in the wrong job. Anyway, Genius was standing next to his boss, who was wearing his pale blue suit, his favorite suit. Suddenly, genius produced a recently sharpened meat cleaver, rolled up his sleeve, and slashed open an artery on his wrist. Blood spurted from his body in rhythm to his heart and covered his boss's best suit, causing him to be uncharacteristically silent for a few seconds. Genius, what you did shows you to be very brave, but also very stupid, commented his boss mildly. It was Ian Maxwell, Bob's son, who told me this extraordinary story. This is another story about an incident which occurred towards the end of Bob's life when he was not himself, and the story is entitled Robert Maxwell and a Tutor in Russian Literature from Sussex University. Right, here goes. I knew a tutor in Russian literature when I was at Sussex University. His name was Robin Milner Gulland, deceased, and he was despised by his colleagues, particularly by another tutor in Russian literature called Colin Byrne, who was really quite amusing. Byrne referred to him, even in front of the students, as Gullible Milne. One of the reasons for Gullible Milne's unpopularity was that he was a singularly infrequent bather and had offensively foul breath. His teeth would have made those of Elizabeth I seem like a Colgate advertisement in comparison. This man was an excellent scholar, however, and he was just about as knowledgeable about Russian literature as a prominent Oxford don. He specialized in the works of the poet Alexander Pushkin, Pushkin, and translated an anthology of Pushkin's poems into English. He decided to approach Robert Maxwell with a view to getting his translating of the poems published. Now, Gullible Milne had a most unfortunate manner of speaking. He tended to indulge in small talk and to gossip in a very slanderous way about people he had met in the past. He also spoke in a timid, simpering way which infuriated the peppery publisher. You must know someone called Eleanor Berry, began Gullible Milne. I know she used to canvass for you. Her name was plastered all over the papers. He continued, it was she who tried to erect a red flag on top of the Buckingham Town Hall, wasn't it? Do you know her? Yes, replied Bob, non-committally. The unwashed tutor struggled to find his words. In fact, he was pulling enough conversational rope to hang himself with. A force within him urged him to continue to indulge in small talk. I really took a great dislike to Eleanor Berry. What I hated most about her was her tasteless gallows humour. She was also very aggressive and eccentric, but having said that, she didn't appear to be afraid of anything or anyone. All in all, I couldn't bear her, though. Bob threw into a rage. You've got teeth like piano keys, you stink like a badger, and you look like the wreck of the fucking Hespers, he shouted. Am I to understand that you don't wish to publish my translation of Pushkin's poems? Ventured Gullible Milne. Oh, fuck off, you silly old tramp, replied Bob,